Hello everyone, this is My Two Cents and welcome back to my channel. Been a little while since we had a stream, but I am once again joined by the Dark Conservatarian, and as I'm sure everyone's had nonstop election news being shoved down their throats for the past couple of months, I figured, hey, we got about a week left, why not discuss all the biggest issues related to the US presidential election 2024. So Dark Con, how you doing?
Doing good. Right before this, I was still working on my cuties response video, so that is still up and coming for anybody who is wondering about that.
You said Cuties response video?
Yeah, a response to somebody alleged to be an intelligent YouTuber that was going, against our supposed insanity against the movie.
I see. You know, that was a while back that movie came out. I did a video about Reason Magazine's response to it at the time, but you're just getting to it now?
Well, I've done plenty of coverage back in 2020, but the thing is, it wouldn't be until like about a year later or something that I would get a whole bunch of hate comments about it, and then a little bit later after that, I would go on hiatus, and then I go thinking even more. So, you know what? Maybe I should address the supposed smartest of cuties defenders, because if you can defeat the most intelligent of them, then it probably only stands to reason that you might have defeated a good chunk of their best arguments.
All right. Well, good for you. We'll be on the lookout for that.
It'll be an entertaining one, I'll assure you.
Excellent. Well, as everyone can see, I have queued up right now an article from the New York Times, review of Donald Trump's recent
or the New York Slimes, as Mark Levin calls it.
Indeed, on the Joe Rogan Experience. I picked the New York Times because they are obviously one of the oldest newspapers in America and now very much reflect the establishment media perspective on everything. But before we get started quick, I would say, DarkCon, you have any particularly strong opinions about any election-related issue that we ought to address on this stream?
Yeah, I just gotta say that the cult of personality around Trump is very bad. It's gotten the whole alienation of people who would like not want to vote or vote third party because they're like, actually being principled, at least according to their own principles. It's just gotten worse this election go around as opposed to 2012 or even 2016 for that matter. When people like before this election season, we've had it pretty bad of where that people will be all like, vote lesser of two evils. A vote for third party is a vote for our enemy. See my video about that, by the way, folks. But this go around, it's gotten to be at its worst. And I bring forth to you guys no better of an example of it being at its worst than that of Kyle Rittenhouse. If none of y'all have ever heard, Kyle Rittenhouse came out some month or two ago say that he was going to write in Ron Paul because Donald Trump is compromised on gun rights. So he is not very consistently pro-gun rights. And if you cannot be truly consistent on gun rights, you're not going to get my vote. Or something along those lines is what he said. And it would be fine. Well, actually, he said no takebacks. And ultimately, if he did do a takeback, well, then it'd be all like his word would be worthless. But still, that's not like the real issue. He would flip less than 12 hours. You want to know why? Because people are just outright bullying him. And when I say bully, I'm meaning not just that people were trying to put forth arguments to say why it's an unwise decision that he wants to write in Ron Paul. No, people were even going so far to say that I wish that they gone ahead and put him in jail. Like so many of us supported him, and now he doesn't want to vote for Trump. It's like people's right to self-defense is their right to self-defense. They have, the right to self-defense regardless of who they vote for. And yeah, I guess to make a long example long or to try to shorten it down, yeah, people were the anti-third party voting mentality has gotten so bad to where that people are all like, yeah, you know what? Fuck your self-defense rights if you're going to be voting third party.
Definitely. So I will just quickly say on that, this is something, in my opinion, the libertarian community at large tends to eat its own quite frequently. There's a lot of ideological purity breakdowns, infighting among libertarians about how to handle the election process, particularly in the United States, but also in other Western countries. that have elections. Of course, a consistent libertarian believes government itself is unethical. Just because you allow the people to vote does not change the fact that government is the unjust use of force and is unethical. Democracy at its core is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. And in that regard, I do believe all consistent libertarians would have to believe government itself is unethical, even if you're given the right to vote. Now, that being said, it's also worth noting that even if you understand that position to be true on an intellectual level, it doesn't change the fact that we are, in fact, living under the boot of a state that has, for whatever reason, and we can discuss what those reasons are, but chosen to give us the vote, and you not voting doesn't change that. So in that regard, there may be some who say, okay, yes, government is unethical, yes, voting is unethical, but the fact is, I've been given the ability to do so, and if I don't vote, either way, one of these two people is going to be the next president, and I think one may be more or less harmful than the other. So in that case, I see voting as justified self-defense, given I am not afforded the opportunity to opt out of the system. There are others that might say you'd be better off, voting for a third party like the Libertarian Party to try and spread libertarian values despite the unethical nature of the system. And where I'm at, as I've explained before, I am black-pilled on government. The fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter who gets elected. There is a very widespread civil service behind our government. There are established deep state corporations, if you will, the defense contracting industry, one of them, that will, at the end of the day, ensure that the government gets its way. No matter who is elected, spending increases, and the government grows its power over every sphere of our lives. So that being said, I think it's perfectly fine. I don't detest any of my libertarian brothers and sisters for whatever they choose to do. If they choose to say, I'm not going to vote out of principle, you go for it. If you decide I'm going to vote for a third party, go for it. If you say I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils, go for it. Either way, what I reject is the idea that all libertarians must particularly take one position or the other in order to be a consistent libertarian in terms of values. And you're not really a libertarian unless you take my particular view on how you should handle the issue of voting. I don't care to have those discussions. Government's going to win anyways. You do whatever you think is best. Vote your conscience. That is my opinion. Obviously, I've seen on X plenty of discussion otherwise, some very strong opinion libertarians who think you absolutely cannot vote as a libertarian. Other libertarians who say you absolutely must vote for the lesser of two evils to be a libertarian. I'm not going to say anyone is or is not a libertarian. I'm just going to say if you believe in the cause of liberty, do what you think is best, but don't pretend you're actually going to make a difference in the long run.
And I also want to say, kind of relating to my point of Kyle Rittenhouse and kind of addressing further on something you said, not going to try to be too long-winded, but on the lesser of two evils mentality, ultimately, I'm not entirely against that kind of point of logic, but at the same time, we can't admit that there is a certain line to it. There is a certain line to where that lesser of two evils, I mean, even a good candidate, an actual legitimate to libertarian principles good candidate, but may not be exactly perfect, is still in other words, you could define them as a lesser evil than the actual evil, that being some kind of socialist and running as a Democrat or whatever have you.
And as an example, I think most libertarians are very happy about the election of Javier Milei in Argentina. Now, he's obviously... And he's a self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist, yet he ran for office. And from what I can tell, he's not perfect, but he's been doing a pretty darn good job of cutting government spending down there. So it does go to show that if you can get a legitimate libertarian values candidate in office, they can actually do some real good.
And another example, as on top of that 2 cents, is that being Rand Paul. I mean, I don't know if any of y'all know him, but I have met at least one anarchist anyways, maybe a few more for that matter, who was open to the idea of actually voting on the very rare occasion, actually voting in the main party, in one of the two main parties. That is, if Rand Paul was to be nominated as Republican. I'm just going to say his name. Hope it's not too taboo, but Nate, the former voluntarist, said many years ago that if Rand Paul was nominated, he would have voted for him. That's the example that I'm thinking of. but because of the fact that and it's that example right there. I mean, a lot of us libertarians and caps and so forth can all say that Rand Paul is great, but he's not perfect, but he's still, like, in other words, a lesser evil than that of Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. So ultimately, he would have been at least libertarian enough, well, safely libertarian enough for some anarchists to have actually do the rare thing of voting for the Republican nominee. That is, if Rand was to be the Republican nominee. But because he wasn't, Donald Trump was not enough of a lesser evil than that of Hillary Clinton. So therefore, they all stayed out. So lesser of two evils, not going to discount that entirely. But at the same time, there comes a point of when that lesser of two evils, that the one lesser of two evils is not lesser of an evil enough.
And I think that's absolutely fair. So with that, let's quick jump into the New York Times review of Donald Trump's 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan. I'm just going to say here quickly, I have not listened to the entire program so far. I've listened to about 1 hour and 40 minutes of it. Darkon, I know you said you haven't listened to it at all, but you were listening to a review of it.
Yeah, Ranting Monkey's coverage of it. He did not watch the entire interview or anything like that on his show. Otherwise, he would have probably been up and doing it for about 12 to 24 hours because it's like 3 hours long or something. And he likes to pause even more than the EFAP buddies do whenever they do a response to a movie review or whatever. But he just watched a couple of little clips of it. And one of the clips was of Trump being asked about aliens. Actually, one of the other things was about the CIA, I believe, was one of the clips. And it was one of the more pertinent ones. Like, he was giving some very bad answers as to why he did not go ahead and reveal and publicize the CIA documents as far as JFK assassination and whatever other shady shit that they have done in the past. And yeah, that's about most of the substantive stuff that I remember about it was the CIA question from Joe to Don.
Okay. Well, let's see what the mainstream establishment and media thought were the most important takeaways. Former President Donald J. Trump taped a nearly 3-hour episode of the Joe Rogan Experience on Friday. He courted the show's young male audience by floating the idea of eliminating the income tax, talked about mixed martial arts fighters, praising the military skills of General Robert E. Lee, and speculating that there was, quote, no reason not to think that there could be life on Mars. All right, well, quickly, I'm just going to go through all of those. If he were actually to succeed in eliminating the income tax, I say amen. Instituting the income, obviously, all forms of taxation are immoral. However, I would say the income tax is particularly immoral, especially considering the fact that now only the top 40% of Americans actually pay any net taxes. By that, I mean the amount they pay out compared to how much they receive back. Mixed martial arts absolutely does appeal, probably to a male audience, and it should be obvious to everyone by now that Harris is absolutely despised by the male population. The political divide in America is pretty much male-female is one of the best ways to divide who's voting, Republican, Vice Democrat. And of course, Robert E. Lee was in fact an extremely competent general, whether or not you believe he fought on the right or wrong side of the Civil War. So all those things are pretty true. Good way to start it off. As for life on Mars, I don't really care whether there is or not, but hey, there could be. Much of the discussion centered on the refrains familiar from Mr. Trump's rambling speeches on the campaign trail, but the podcast offered Mr. Trump an opportunity to reach an audience his campaign covets. Mr. Rogan has 14.5 million followers on Spotify, 17.6 on YouTube, many of them young male, low propensity voters that the Trump campaign is hoping to draw to the polls. At one point, Mr. Rogan tried to lead Mr. Trump, who was described his meandering, digression-laden speaking style as the weave back to the point. Your weave is getting wide, Mr. Rogan said. You're getting wide with this weave. Here are 6 takeaways. Now, in fairness, I've only listened to the an hour and 40 minutes of it so far. Trump does, get off the beaten track sometimes. The man has a lot to say. He could have had a great career as a podcaster himself. I'll just say that.
He can, but the thing is that Kamala is even worse. Like, I don't even think that we could call Kamala Harris's way of speaking a rambling. That seems to be a little bit too charitable, and the term rambling is already enough of a pejorative as it is. Did you see the interview with Brett Baier?
Oh, yes. She absolutely slaughtered her, and that was
terrible.
only 20 minutes. It was ridiculous.
Yeah,
But
and not to mention there was the one question that he asked her, like, why is it that if you think that Trump, well, I can't remember the exact word for word of what Brett Baer, how that he asked her the question essentially of, if Trump is so hateable, then why are so many people are still supporting him? And her response was, an election. This is a presidential election. It's not supposed to be easy.
yeah,
That
like,
was the stupidest, most pathetic answer of all time. And it really like busted a gut for Monkey and Jack when he covered that interview.
absolutely. Trump runs off the beaten trail. He talks a lot and can get off track, but at least he gives meaningful answers to the questions. Kamala Harris, I know everyone's used the term word salad, but it's not overused in her case. She gives meaningless answers that are just, tons of drivel that have to do with the question she's been asked. So,
if I may say, actually, Ranting Monkey said that at least word salad has at least salad. Applying to the term of word salad, at least salad has a nutritional value to it. Whereas Kamala Harris, it's not even word salad; it's more like diarrhea of the mouth, just a bowl of shit.
Indeed. All right, so continuing on. Trump saw the podcast as well worth a detour. That Mr. Trump opted to step off the campaign trail and spend hours in Mr. Rogan's studio in Austin, a detour that delayed the start of his remarks at a rally on Friday evening in Michigan by several hours, was a mark of Mr. Rogan's
Why are they acting like this is a stupid move on his part? I mean, if anything, it's a very smart move because Rogan is like one of the biggest podcasts in America right now. And like, you know what? It's funny because they mentioned in the earlier segment further above the article that it would like appeal to young male audience. And now they're all like, or acting like this is a bad campaign move on his part.
Okay. Yeah.
Like,
well,
what?
I have to disagree. I mean, what they said there is Trump saw it as worthwhile, and I would say it absolutely is worthwhile. I think campaign-wise, he's smart to continue doing interviews that show he actually love him or hate him. He knows what he's talking about. Kamala Harris, she has no idea what she's doing. Every time she opens her mouth, she falls in the polls. I don't think that's a coincidence. Just 2 years ago, Mr. Rogan said he had declined to have Mr. Trump on his show, calling the former president an existential threat to democracy. But in their interview, Mr. Rogan was receptive, if occasionally challenging interlocutor. Mr. Rogan, how the heck do you pronounce that word? Interlocutor? I don't know. I failed English class. Well, not really, but I
have rarely seen that word myself. I think it might be interlocutor.
Interlocutor.
I think you pronounced it roughly correctly. People
Very
will
well.
at least know what you're trying to say.
Mr. Rogan acknowledged that he had brought his position on interviewing Mr. Trump after he survived an assassination attempt in July at a rally in Pennsylvania. Once they shot you, I was like, he's got to come here, Mr. Rogan said. It's all about timing.
Yep. I mean, Rogan is all about them conspiracy theories, and we all know that a presidential or even a presidential candidate assassination is all the worth or related anyways to conspiracy talks.
Oh, absolutely. So I want to talk to you about 2020 because you said over and over again that you were robbed in 2020, Mr. Rogan said, offering Mr. Trump a platform to repeat his debunked claims of widespread fraud in the 2020 election and the lie that he won that year. Okay, well, obviously
they keep on
that shows their bias.
Well, yeah, but they also keep, all these mainstream news articles or just news articles in general, they keep on repeating ad nauseum or putting on the freaking annotator that these are debunked. These are debunked claims, or say these election fraud claims which have no evidence or something like that. They keep on doing that every single time. They just are so freaking insecure about the idea of voter fraud to where that they had to like say it every single time. It's like, I wish I had like an example that was equivalent to this, but still, it's like very insecure, I think.
Well, the hypocrisy is Hillary Clinton to this day is claiming she only lost the 2016 election because Russia, despite the fact that her campaign funded a fake dossier trying to prove that Trump's ties to Russian intelligence, yada, yada, yada. And not one of these mainstream outlets will come out and say that her claims have been debunked. Now, am I going to say conclusively it is proven that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election and Joe Biden did not? Of course not. What I think is established
Neither will I.
There were indeed suspicious there was suspicious data coming out of a lot of states with the 2020 election, and the courts did not establish that there was no fraud. They, for the most part, dismissed the cases for lack of standing. We also had wide use of mail-in balloting that year. The U.S. State Department's own reports have stated I think as early as 2006, that investigations in other countries have shown that mail-in voting is extremely unsecure, extremely susceptible to fraud, especially because after the fact, it's very difficult to prove the fraud afterwards. All I would like to see is more talk about what the country, if we really do take democracy as seriously as we supposedly do, why are more people not talking about things we can do to make the elections more secure? Of course, they don't want to talk about that. All they want to assure you is that if a Republican wins, the election must have been stolen. And if a Democrat wins, well, it was the most safe and secure election everywhere. Of course, that shows us the bias of the paper, but we already knew that. Mr. Trump lamented that the judges didn't have what it took to turn over an election, and repeated a few false claims, suggested that mail-in ballots were not secure. Again, the U.S. State Department already declared that mail-in balloting wasn't secure until magically they decided it was in COVID. That's just garbage. Mr. Rogan seemed to back Mr. Trump's questioning of election processes, at one point likening those who raise concerns over elections to those who question coronavirus vaccines. You got labeled an election denier, Mr. Rogan said. It's like being labeled an anti-vaxxer if you question some of the health consequences that people have from COVID-19 shots. In 2022, Mr. Rogan was criticized for spreading what was widely seen as misinformation about the coronavirus. His stance led Neil Young and Joni Mitchell to remove their music from Spotify to protest the platform's support of the podcaster. And again, I'm just going to say on this, the whole misinformation BS, look, if you have a government who it is the job of the government to decide what is and is not misinformation, congratulations, you are officially living under a full-fledged tyranny. I mean, if you're living under a government, you're already living under a tyranny, but the worst tyrannies are the ones where the government, you have a 1984 style Ministry of Truth that literally tells people what is legal and illegal to believe. I am firmly of the opinion that if the truth is on your side, you should never have to censor anyone. If people are putting out garbage, debunk them using facts. Trying to shut them down only convinces them that they're actually in the right.
To be fair, they haven't gone so far to go out. I mean, there is like the suspicions that government, specifically Democrats, worked side by side with Twitter, as it was referred to back in the day, and YouTube and Facebook to try and censor people. But it's not like that they have like a hard ban on people for questioning that sort of stuff. But the fact that they have like all these administrations that have certain rules of what is disinformation for like their media surrogates to go out and say this is not true ad nauseum is definitely like a heavy step in that direction that you mentioned, 2 cents.
Absolutely. Now, getting on to this next one, I actually do want to discuss a little bit more. So Trump floated eliminating the income tax. Mr. Trump voiced casual support for the idea of eliminating the federal income tax, suggesting a return to economic policies that existed before the early 20th century.
And might I say, if he does that, then that might be the single best thing that any president has done within the last 50 plus years, and might actually, might actually make me proud to vote for him if I vote for him. But by the way, full disclosure, is kind of likely at this point, people.
All right, so I do definitely have some thoughts here. I'm going to finish what they have to say here, and then we'll get into income tax versus tariffs. Did you just float the idea of getting rid of income taxes and replacing it with tariffs? Mr. Rogan asked Mr. Trump, who had mentioned the notion on Monday in a Fox News segment. Were we serious about that? Yeah, sure, Mr. Trump said, but why not? He again offered praise for William McKinley, the 25th president, a Republican whose views on tariffs Mr. Trump frequently commends. Even before Mr. Trump began talking about eliminating the income tax, an analysis by the nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimated that his other economic proposals could add as much as $15 trillion to the nation's debt over 10 years. Well, quickly on that last point, it's not like Biden's programs have exactly been helping the national debt. I think in the last month, we went up something like $500 billion, or maybe it was more than that. I don't remember the exact number, but it was pretty impressive. Now, on the subject here, I think, again, I should point out, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. All taxation is theft, and all taxation hurts the free market economy. now that we've gotten that out of the way, though, I think there is room for discussion of, okay, we all agree, at least if you're watching this program, I'm going to assume you agree taxation is theft and all forms of taxation are unethical. That being said, setting aside that question, assuming we have to have taxation of some sort, what would be the least immoral or the most ideal form of it? And would what is more fair, a personal income tax or tariffs? I would say this. I think tariffs, much like a sales tax, so long as it's uniform, is a more fair form of taxation. In other words, when you have a sales tax, if you don't buy anything, you don't pay any taxes. And tariffs are essentially a form of sales tax. We talked about this before, but just in case for anyone who's not familiar, a tariff is a tax imposed on foreign manufacturers, foreign goods brought into the United States, or a tariff in any country is a tax on foreign goods brought into those states. When ships arriving at a United States port carrying foreign goods arrive, they are charged a tariff, a percentage of all the goods they're bringing in, which is paid by that manufacturer. And the mistake everyone makes, though, is thinking that because it is the party bringing the goods into the country that pays that tariff, it's the foreign producer that's actually paying this tax, not the American people. But the reason that's not true is because, much like any other business endeavor, when the foreign manufacturer pays the tariff, he just then takes that cost and tax it on to the price of his goods in order to make that money back. So if he would have charged $25 before the tariff was imposed, he may now charge $50 to recuperate the cost he just lost in paying that tariff. So ultimately, the people who pay the tariff are the American people, who end up having to pay more for foreign goods than they otherwise would have because of the tariff that was imposed. There are several arguments for tariffs, none of them good, some of them possibly a lesser of two evils, and some of them bad. I will say Donald Trump, I have many, many criticisms of Trump, and his misunderstanding of the economics of tariffs is one of them. I will say this: if you have uniform tariffs on all goods and services coming into the United States, regardless of what they are, I'm willing to say that, much like a sales tax, I believe that's more fair than a federal income tax, in as much as you as the citizen, if you don't buy anything, you don't pay the tax. If you do buy, you pay the same person. Every person ends up paying the same percentage of tax based on how much they purchase. However, how tariffs historically are used, and often if you hear the term protective tariff added in, what quite often happens in economies is lobbyists for certain corporations will lobby the federal government to put insanely high tariffs on products from particular industries that therefore benefit American industries who can't compete with cheaper produced foreign goods. They impose insanely sky-high tariffs on industries that come from foreign countries, therefore making, by default, American-made goods cheaper, and Americans then purchase American-made goods as opposed to foreign-made goods, and it benefits those particular American industries. However, in that regard, the American people end up having to pay more for goods they otherwise could purchase cheaper. And it's been estimated that by libertarian economists, that for every one job that is quote unquote saved by protective tariffs, another 16 jobs are lost somewhere else in the economy because of increased costs. Now, Donald Trump has been very much in favor of using quote unquote protective tariffs to benefit American industries. The fact is, protective tariffs benefit no one except those industries. It is the American people who lose by losing jobs due to higher costs, because certain industries, the government chooses to pick winners and losers and benefit certain industries at the expense of the American people. That is a farce, and Donald Trump is 100% wrong on that. Now, that being said, all right, go ahead.
If I may ask for clarity, is what you're more preferring or kind of defending is a universal equal tariff as opposed to selective protective tariffs?
Exactly. I think, a 10% tariff on all foreign goods would be much like a flat sales tax that could be fairly enforced, and it would be more fair than a personal income tax, in as much as a personal income tax, everyone is forced to pay a certain percentage of their income. And generally, certain income levels are forced to pay more than other income levels. On the other hand, if you have a flat sales tax, 2%, 10%, whatever it is, however much you purchase determines how much taxes you pay. If you don't purchase anything, you don't pay any taxes. And if you do purchase anything, you pay the same percentage as everyone else. And therefore, a uniform tariff on all foreign goods, I would see as a form of sales tax. Again, it's not good for the economy, but it would at least be more fair than a personal income tax. On the other hand, if you have 10% tariffs on all goods and services, and then on, foreign-made cars, you have a 90% tariff, and that's meant to benefit the American auto industry. That is what I would oppose, because you're drastically increasing American costs when it comes to buying cars solely to benefit American auto manufacturers, but at the expense of the entire American people. And his name escapes me at the moment, but the economist who talked about that which is seen and that which is unseen, the industries that are benefited by the tariffs see how they benefit, but it's very difficult to see all the specific ways the rest of America suffers as those increased costs affect various sectors of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So that really, I will say that, just to sum up again, I think uniform tariffs might be better than federal income tax. That being said, Donald Trump does need to be corrected on the issue of protective tariffs, which he has consistently failed on before. Moving on, is there life on Mars? Mr. Rogan pressed Mr. Trump for government secrets on whether there is life beyond Earth. The former president initially said he had never been a believer in extraterrestrial life, but then he seemed to pivot, recalling that he had interviewed solid jet pilots who claimed to have seen very strange things in the sky. There's no reason not to think that Mars and all these planets don't have life, Mr. Trump said. Mr. Rogan corrected him. Well, Mars, we've had probes there and rovers, and I don't think there's any life there, Mr. Rogan said. Mars is the most widely explored planet in the solar system, other than Earth, of course. Maybe it's life we don't know about, replied Mr. Trump, who had vowed in stump speeches to get an American astronaut on Mars. Scientists have not found life on Mars, though they are on a hunt for evidence of fossilized organisms. I'm not really sure why the New York Times is a huge takeaway. I mean, does anyone really care at this point whether there's life on Mars? I mean, it would be cool if there is, but I'm pretty sure there's no intelligent life there. Or if there was, they certainly haven't done a very good job of reaching out.
It's just Trump derangement syndrome. They're trying to find every little thing to rag on Trump about. Like, I have like dozens of criticisms with Trump, especially for those that that I'm not able to think of right off the top of my head. But life on Mars, that is like, and his opinions on that is the least of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Trump does not trust polls or pollsters. Mr. Trump told Mr. Rogan he had little regard for political polls, explaining that he believed there was probably a lot of fraud in them, even as he at times positively cited polls that showed him doing well with voters. You know how polls are done, Mr. Trump asked. Oh, I'm going to get myself in trouble, so I really don't believe too much in them. Polls have consistently shown a tight race between Mr. Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. Polls were notably inaccurate during the last two presidential elections, and many pollsters have taken steps to try and improve their accuracy. But Mr. Trump suggested, without evidence, that they were not just mistaken, but might be fraudulent. I don't think they interview in many cases, he said. Again, the accuracy of polls, I'm not sure who really... At the end of the day, does anyone really care what polls say? No. They care who actually gets elected in the end. And as they just noted, polls have been wrong in the last two elections. Although, in the case of the 2016 election, Hillary was leading by just a little bit, and she lost substantially. In the case of the 2020 election, Biden was leading, I think, by at least 10 points, at least moderately substantially, and he ended up winning by a narrow margin. So they're at least not as good as one would think. I would say the difference is this time Trump seems to be leading in most polls, and usually it's Democrats either lead but win by not as much, or they lead and end up losing. So if the last few polls are good news for Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Lots of praise, but a challenge on the environment. Mr. Rogan was a friendly interviewer, often praising Mr. Trump. He rarely interrupted the former president, and they seemed to bond over their shared love of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, a mixed martial arts league whom match Mr. Trump attends. And Mr. Rogan, a stand-up comedian, praised Mr. Trump for comedic instincts on the trail. But their worldviews.
Might I just add, as far as that first paragraph goes, as far as I know, Rogan's podcast is typically not one meant for like harsh debates or grilling people. I mean, yeah, he'll make exceptions, like the CNN reporters that he's interviewed over the freaking Ivermectin, yeah, the ivermectin lies that they were spreading about him. But other than that, they're usually chill interviews.
Definitely, definitely. But their worldviews were not always a neat fit. At one point, Mr. Rogan asked Mr. Trump to elaborate on why he thought people opposed increasing oil and gas production of fracking outside of the environmental concerns, which are legitimate, of course. Mr. Trump started to object to that point, but Mr. Rogan continued on with his question, and he turned stern as he pressed Mr. Trump over his claim that environmental regulations were used only to enrich consultants who stymie development. They use it as a weapon, Mr. Trump said. Mr. Rogan pushed back with a series of questions, but there are legitimate concerns about environmental impact, correct? He asked, citing environmental disasters. You want to mitigate that as much as possible. Sure, Mr. Trump conceded, but he shifted to his standard insistence that he was focused on clean water and clean air before moving into a discussion about China and complaints about California. Mr. Trump has made a sometimes uneasy alliance with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the environmental activist and former presidential candidate who has endorsed him. Mr. Kennedy, whom Mr. Rogan favors, has advanced a number of environmental proposals that clash with some of Mr. Trump's deregulation pledges and plan to increase fracking. All right, here's what I'm going to say on the issue of the environment. And I think this is the biggest hypocrisy of environmental freaks. Do you support nuclear power? Because that is one of the cleanest, least environmentally damaging forms of energy we have. The answer is almost always no. If you don't support nuclear power, I don't want to hear one word you have to say on environmentalism and global warming. And that is my opinion there. I don't know, Darkon, you have any strong opinions on global warming, environmental issues?
No, I mean, I will say that I don't know. There was a time of when that I was just outright unbelieving of man-made climate change or just global warming in general. But ever since that I saw Potholer 54's debunkings of Steven Crowder's videos, one point in particular was that he admitted that one of the caps was increasing its ice content. I think it might have been the South Pole that he was talking about in that particular debunking video. But in the North Cap, it was actually decreasing even more. So it was like a net loss of ice. And so that was the moment for me where I was all like, okay, yeah, I guess I'm not as hardline anti-global warming as far as believing that goes. But still, on the point of nuclear energy, yeah, I'm definitely all for that. I mean, the only reason why I would think that they're against that is because they're fear-mongering that we're going to have like a dozen Chernobyls in this country or something like that.
Which I know that's not really where they're coming from. It goes to show global warming is not a problem that leftists actually want to solve. The reason they've plastered it up, they want to get rid of all privately owned vehicles and institute government planned communication like trains that are supposedly environmentally friendly, but really create a situation where the government can monitor where you're going at all times, because in order to go, you have to purchase a ticket and you can be tracked. That is my opinion on why global warming is a thing.
Right.
I think if global warming really is a thing, which I'm not going to take a hard stance whether it is or is not, I will say if it is a thing, it is the free market that will produce the solutions, not government policy, if history has shown us in nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, there's a popular saying that has went around. I've heard on Ranting Monkeys podcast in particular. When it comes to the issue of rich people, they don't hate. Excuse me. They don't. It's not that the left loves poor people. They just hate rich people. In this case, it sounds like they don't love the planet. They just hate the private sector.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so with that is the New York Times evaluation of the Donald Trump interview. Like I said, I haven't listened to the whole thing myself, although I hope to finish it here in short order. That being said,
I do have one more thing or a couple more things, I guess, to bring up before we went to live chat, if you didn't mind.
Oh, by all means, please do.
Yeah, like so kind of expounding on like one or two points that I mentioned about earlier. If you guys can't tell, the Trump cultist mentality has been the thing that has honestly been most on my mind this election cycle. Like, yeah, I go listen to my more conservative leaning podcasts that are like more critical of the left than of the right. Although Ranting Monkey is heavily critical of the Trump cult of personality, but still, the thing that I keep tracks on more is Trump cultists and their mentality when it comes to the Kyle Rittenhouses of the world or whatever. But so to expound on that, though, thing that I wanted to say that is, if Trump loses, I think, and I hope at least, that there is to be one good thing that will come out of a Trump loss, and that being the Trump cult of personality finally dying out. Like, yeah, we had like the Reagan legacy, and pretty much everybody was, the Republican Party at large was of the mentality that, hey, you got to be pro-Reagan. You got to cite Reagan every once in a while for why your beliefs, or for why you hold what beliefs you claim to hold, or else you're not going to be a viable Republican nominee for president, mainly, or any other office for that matter. And now it seems that Trump is becoming the ultimate litmus test of where that I keep on seeing campaign ads from congressmen and the like saying that they're pro-Trump, as if that is like a prerequisite for becoming a quote unquote good conservative within the Republican Party nowadays. And that's bad in of itself. But what's worse is that there are some people, I mean, I don't know if any of y'all seen it yourselves, but I definitely know that I have at least one family member in particular who literally thinks that Trump is perfect on a policy level. Like, literally no criticisms towards him, not on spending or anything. And even if people even if the Republican voters, your average Republican voter, does not outright say, oh, Trump is perfect on literally everything, there is still the fact that people just are slow to speak and criticize about Republican spending at large, but more specifically to this issue at hand, Trump's spending during his first term in office. Like, the first two stimulus packages were signed by him. He could have vetoed those to save the country some money and to for us to not have as high of inflation as we do nowadays, but he did not. And yet the only Republicans that I have heard, or at least big name Republicans I've heard to criticize Trump on that, would be Rand Paul and Nikki fucking Haley, of all people. So it's
well, a broken
bad.
broken clock is still right twice a day. I'm not going to say Nikki Haley has it wrong on everything, but
yeah,
I think the point you're making, Darkon, is the Trump cult of personality and Trump derangement syndrome equally need to go away. There are people, on the political right who are convinced Donald Trump is the second coming of Jesus Christ, and there are people on the political left who think Donald Trump is literally Adolf Hitler back from the grave. Both people need to go away.
Let's not forget that, so to be fair, Obama obviously had his own cult of personality. I remember fondly back in 2008 or 2009, whenever it was, that there was this one video released that was, I guess, kind of viral on the internet. It was all quoting a Bible verse saying, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, Barack Obama." It was some Jamaican reggae style song, and was saying, trying to put Obama up as a Jesus type figure by, inserting his name in a popular Bible prayer. So it's ridiculous. But yeah, I'm not so sure if it's guaranteed to happen. But if he does not get a second term, I hope that the Trump cult of personality just dies out, so that maybe we don't have as many Republicans eating each other alive just because of the fact that by saying that, oh, fuck your self-defense rights in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, just because they don't go falling in line with the Republican Party when it comes to voting for presidential candidates.
I will say the one good outcome I would see of Trump being elected a second time is, it's no mystery. I mean, looking at the New York Times, CNN, most forms of establishment media, as well as the Elon Musk having released the Twitter files, seeing how in the 2020 election, the FBI was collaborating with Twitter to try and kill negative stories on Biden. Obviously, the deep state, and when I say deep state, what I mean is the government at large. But I think it's important to point out that when we use particular terms like deep state, that gets thrown around a lot. When I say deep state, what I mean are, in particular, two entities: civil service positions, that's unelected government officials who stay in office no matter who holds the presidency. And then you have the largest political donors, in particular, the defense establishment, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, thing like that. The true establishment that makes the wheels of government turn. That deep state very clearly would like to have power over the American people such that they could control what you believe and what you do through sheer force of propaganda. And it is clear with everything from the 2020 election to COVID-19 to you can point to 1,000,001 other examples of where that arm of the deep state is losing its ability to influence the American people. But they would like to be able to control the American people to elect their preferred candidate and believe certain things. Now, I would say it used to be such as Obama versus Romney, where when the deep state was effectively funding both campaigns, they didn't really care who won. Donald Trump, despite his flaws, remains at least marginally independent of the deep state, which is why they hate him so much. Were he to be elected again,
you say marginally dependent of being funded, marginally dependent of the deep state. I guess you go saying only marginally because there is still the fact that he got a big fat check from whoever that the shareholder is. I can't remember the guy's name for TikTok is.
Yes. So I'm going to say Donald Trump is not immune to being influenced by the deep state. However, he's not, I would say, the reason he's so hated is because he's not completely controlled by them in a way that other politicians are. That's not to say he's not influenced. He absolutely is. But he's... But I think what makes Trump uniquely hated is his being a loose cannon in a regard that a lot of other politicians are not. I would see a second Trump election as a middle finger to the deep state in that despite all their best efforts, they were not able to manipulate the American people, much less the election, away from Donald Trump and to Kamala Harris. Will they still get their way in the end? Of course they will. That's the nature of government. But it would at least be a reminder the American people are, it would bring warm feelings to my heart that a large enough majority of Americans were not swayed by their efforts.
I do also want to say, another point to be fair as far as, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you? Was you going to say more on that point?
Nope, go right ahead.
Okay, so to be fair on what I said about hoping that Trump, a cult of personality, dies out if Trump loses. On the other hand, if Trump does win, then it would be a giant middle finger to the establishment. Yeah, as 2 Cents has said multiple times. Also, at the same time, I don't want to be legitimizing all the destinies of the country. The Trump assassination attempt has just really melted Democrats' brains or Democrat voters' brains in a way that very few other events have ever had. I used to have been a fairly regular listener of Destiny, but as soon as, for some reason, it's the Trump assassination attempt of all things that caused him to be all you know what, fuck conservatives, we have been too nice to them, and he wants to say that all conservatives are just a bunch of, especially Trump supporters more specifically, I guess, are a bunch of inbreds and subhuman, and if they all die, then don't give a shit. He might even crack jokes at any conservative that dies. He doesn't even care if his own conservative parents were to get shot at a Trump rally or whatever. It's I think, and of course, there are multiple other people that were laughing about the fact that he was attempted to be assassinated on, wishing that the assassin even was successful at that. But yeah, ultimately, if he does win, it would delegitimize these people and their feelings about conservatives and all that stuff. So there is a good side on that front to Trump winning.
As for I'm sorry, I completely lost my train of thought where I was going here. Next, to the point of also Donald Trump is literally Adolf Hitler. A main talking point of the political left has been Donald Trump is literally Adolf Hitler. Now, I think here's where I actually want to do a stream here in the near future about what is the real history of Adolf Hitler. You know, all the rhetoric about, I've always been familiar with World War II history. It's a topic I've loved to study. But in the past year, I've been reading a lot of books specifically about Hitler, just because I feel like Hitler's name is invoked so often. It would do better to I really wanted to dive in and learn the truth about Adolf Hitler. I recently finished the book Hitler by Ian Kershaw. It's the most longest biography I could find about it. I got it in audiobook form. It was about 47 hours long. I've read Mein Kampf cover to cover. I'm currently working on more a book called Churchill, Hitler, and How the West Was Lost by Patrick Buchanan. He takes a more unorthodox view about World War II history. So I've tried my best to I've tried my best to learn about Hitler from all angles. You know, the people who are staunchly against him, the people who are for him, and just the most detailed history I can. What I will say is, for all the people saying we've been lied to about Hitler, no, you haven't. Just there are some people who think Hitler was actually right. I disagree. But there are some the people who tell you you've been lied to about Hitler, I assure you, whatever you learned about Hitler in school, you weren't lied to. They probably just think he happened to be right. As for Hitler being the greatest villain in the history of the world, well, that's really not true either. We've got plenty of governments around the world, to include modern politicians in the United States, who very much seek to emulate Hitler. And what I would say by that is, when Hitler came to power, one of the first things he did was jail or kill all his political opposition, as well as shut down any media outlets that were not in favor of him. I mean, sure, strangely enough, Abraham Lincoln did exactly the same thing back in the Civil War, and that is by and large.
Abe Lincoln is bearded Hitler.
Indeed, but tell me, based on the amount of efforts to cancel, imprison, or even kill Donald Trump by the political left and the establishment, who really is behaving more like Hitler? I leave that up to you. But that's I'm just going to say, we'll get into that later. Dark Khan, if you'd like to join, by all means, but I would like to have a specific stream on the history of Adolf Hitler and what really is the real story behind him. But I think it would be good for the nation to see, at least I would hope more people would see, all the efforts to stop Donald Trump from getting elected have been much more akin. Granted, they're not perfect, but much more like Hitler's efforts to silence his political opposition. If Donald Trump gets into office and, as he did last time, does not in fact initiate mass witch hunts against his political opponents, he will prove yet again conclusively that, love him or hate him, he is not Adolf Hitler in the flesh.
Yeah, I honestly don't know of how much that I would be able to contribute to such a live stream. I mean, I guess I could be like a live and on-call listener to ask questions that you'd be able to hear live, but that's about it. Other than that, I almost think that this would be more worthy for a video subject, but at the same time, I know of how that you're burnt out on doing videos nowadays, and I don't know exactly how that you'd be able to format such a video, but on the point of Trump-Hitler comparisons, one of the other issues that I kind of wanted to talk about, if this is a working segue right here, is the issue of free speech of Trump versus Harris. So, if you didn't mind.
Oh, go right ahead.
Okay, so one thing that definitely stuck out to me in the vice presidential debate, like, ultimately that debate was less watchable than the main presidential debate, not because that it was insufferable, but more because it was just more boring, except for one point, and that was at the end of when that the issue of January 6, 2021 was brought up, and the issue of questioning election results. Like Tim Walz was trying to say that it's because of questioning voter fraud why it's just directly and inherently always attached to cause for violence or to cause violence, in the same way that if you give somebody bath salts, I guess it will cause them to be like a murderous, mindless zombie or something. By the way, I don't know exactly how bath salts work, but that's how I vaguely hear that they work like. But still, because of that supposed logic that he puts forth, he says that questioning election integrity and saying that there was voter fraud in 2020 or even here in 2024, that should be made illegal. And we all know that the establishment media was trying to put annotations and even censor people on at least private social media companies anyways, people for questioning the vaccines and coronavirus. So probably not too much of a stretch to say that Tim Walz might even have no quibbles with wanting to ban questioning of vaccines and whatnot. And I don't even think he just wanted to stop at just banning people off of Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube for that shit. He probably wants to go so far to like arrest Mark Levin and Sean Hannity for speaking those opinions on their radio shows and their Fox News shows too, for that matter. So yeah, pretty scary shit. And considering that he has been the pick for Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris hasn't said anything opposite, and even said stuff that might be at least vaguely in alignment with what Tim Walz said at the end of the VP debate, going full mask off tyrant. Probably not too much of a stretch to say that she supports similar measures like that as well. Whereas the worst that we can probably say about Trump is he called for a jail time for people who want to burn the American flag, which maybe he would want to go as so far to ban people for even stating or vocalizing with their actual words opinions about how America is so bad and why they hate America and so forth. But he hasn't went that far just yet, or at least not explicitly state that, or even imply that he wants to ban actual words. He wants to just like, I am all against bans against burning the American flag. I'm also against burning the American flag itself because I love this country. God bless America, y'all. But still, I just wanted to know your 2 cents. I just wanted to know your 2 cents on what do you think there is to compare between these two candidates when it comes to free speech restrictions and bans and so forth. On like, who is the worst one? Or are they just as bad? Is Trump slightly better? Or what do you think?
All right. Well, here I think that I am glad you brought this up, because I think an important part of the discussion that is missed, especially in a lot of the free speech discussions we have, is the difference between freedom of speech and freedom of association. Now, at its core, freedom of speech means you have the right to say whatever you want, like the only possible limit being an active, unambiguous call for violence. But the government cannot arrest you or have you forcibly silenced through government fiat because of what you say. That does not necessarily preclude other individuals choosing not to associate with you because of what you say. Now, here I think is where the confusion comes in. I'm sure everyone remembers the social media fiasco when Candace Owens got fired from the Daily Wire. And a lot of the anti-Shapiro crowd came out and saying, I would argue largely the anti-Semitic crowd, but nonetheless, that's neither here nor there. Well, Ben Shapiro claims the Daily Wire is a free speech outlet and he fires Candace Owens because she had the gall to criticize Israel. Do you believe in free speech or what? Now here, I have to point out, no one, certainly not the Daily Wire, ever tried to silence Candace Owens. Candace Owens was fired from the Daily Wire. She promptly started a new radio show, and her podcasts are available for everyone to listen to on YouTube and her new platform that is separate from the Daily Wire. What the Daily Wire did say is that because she was espousing viewpoints that were outside of their values, they chose not to employ her any longer. That is not a violation of her free speech. Makes sense to me. Yes. Now you can argue that the Daily Wire's views are wrong and Candace Owens' views are correct, but either way, that's not a violation of free speech. That's an issue of freedom of association. What Tim Walz wants
makes this as much sense that if one of their co-hosts came out and start hardcore advocate for banning AR-15s, that they would also fire that said co-host as well.
Absolutely, and I know both. What's his name? Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro both said as much in interviews they did about why Owens was fired. I think they said, for example, we would not employ someone who is radically pro-abortion, etc. And as much as when it comes to sites like Facebook or YouTube or X banning individuals for certain forms of speech, I don't like that. Especially, I find it hypocritical when platforms claim we're about the exchange of ideas, not promoting particular viewpoints. But at the same time, I don't oppose that so long as they're not, except in cases where they're actively collaborating with government, as Twitter was before Elon Musk took over. But again, choosing to deplatform someone, strictly speaking, is not a violation of their freedom of speech. We have platforms like Rumble. Nick Fuentes is one of the most famously censored people in America right now. His show is still available to be watched on Rumble. He's been kicked off several platforms, but he's not been silenced, not in a true First Amendment sense of the word. What Tim Walz is talking about, as you point out, is using the arm of government to throw people in jail or otherwise forcibly silence them for things that they say. That is a violation of the First Amendment. And absolutely, hearing him say his opposition to that shows that he and the Harris campaign are far more authoritarian than Donald Trump. I know Donald Trump has said, as you mentioned, he would like to throw people in jail for burning the flag. I don't know of any unambiguous calls to do so with the power of the state. As of right now, the Supreme Court has ruled that burning the flag is a protected form of free speech, regardless of how you individually feel about it. And I don't believe Donald Trump opposes the fact that you would actually have to pass a constitutional amendment to change that. He may well be saying, as some people do, I don't think you should. He may be saying, I don't think you should burn the flag. I wish on a personal, emotional level, I would like to throw people in jail, but I've seen no reason to think, especially from his first presidency, that he would actually try to fight back against the First Amendment in that regard.
I don't know. It's a possibility that Michael Knowles was like steel manning Donald Trump, and by steel manning, I'm meaning he misrepresented Trump in a way that he thinks would make Trump look better, at least in the eyes of people who have Michael Knowles' belief. But it was like in response to him and a video clip of Donald Trump that he presented on the video that I responded to of how that I know about this information. But it seems like that he was more explicitly proposing the banning of it. I mean, there is the possibility that it is just bolster in the same way that Donald Trump bolstered about wanting to jail Hillary Clinton, but lo and behold, he flip-flopped on that, said they're good people, referring to the Clintons after he had won the general election and before he was inaugurated. So there is that possibility, I guess. It just, don't remember where exactly I was going with that, but I think you get my point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we've reached the hour mark here. I did want to get to some of the comments, although unfortunately we're already past the hour mark. So for those of you who are in the chat, thank you very much for participating. Unfortunately, I'm running low on time here to keep the stream going, so we probably won't be able to get to your comments, but I will quickly I will quickly just add my final thoughts here. Again, I will sum up. I'm black-pilled on government. Inflation is going to get worse. It can't be stopped at this point. The U.S. dollar is going to collapse. I can't tell you when, but it's inevitable at this point. I think there was a comment. I am going to pull up here. Solo Knight, he says, at this point, I'd rather have the speed bump of Trump than the full acceleration of the other side. I would say, again, Donald Trump is not the savior of the world, but I would like to see him get elected, if for no other reason than as a middle finger to all the leftists I can't stand, and the fact that I think, all things considered, despite the fact that there's no stopping the collision course this country is on, it would be a nice reprieve in the meantime. And so for that regard, I will say I personally take the tact of, again, I think I oppose all forms of government totalitarianism. I don't think just because you have the right to vote, you're necessarily more free, as Captain Pipsqueak pointed out in the comments earlier. But I personally, of all the positions libertarians take, this time around, I'm of the opinion, I think it is, I as a libertarian would choose to vote for Donald Trump as the lesser of two evils in this case, just because I think that's the best, in my opinion, that's the best decision I can make in the situation I'm in. Now, for all my libertarian brothers and sisters who think it's more ethical to just not vote or to vote for a third party, I certainly don't disagree with you. Do your conscience, but that's where I'm coming from at this point. Darkon, where are you at?
Oh, I just wanted to say, to quote good old Ted Cruz back in 2016, before he kind of flip-flopped and endorsed Donald Trump, vote your conscience, y'all. And also, I did have a couple of things to shill before we leave, because am I to get the implication that you are actually not going to read the live chat right now, that we're not going to do that?
If there are any, I guess we're not going to go through the whole thing just for the sake of time. If there were any specific comments you remember you want me to pull up, by all means, we can do that.
Okay. Not particularly. Thank you all, like Captain Pipsqueak, Mr. Merchant, and Coffee House Dialogue, Base Spartan, Solo Knight, and Litigious Society, Crod, for all chipping in right here.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your comments.
Yeah, and a couple things that I want to shill. I am running a secondary channel. You guys probably know about it, Darkon Entertainment. And just recently, I uploaded myself a movie review of Transformers 1. Go check that out if you guys are interested. And also, there's a third channel that I am running, actually cooperatively with Reckless Trucker, called Americana Project. And that's where I'm doing a lot of my video uploading nowadays, because I think uploading stuff, unless it's like a really actually good video on my main channel, I think I'm just hurting myself in the algorithm with all these little tidbit like highlight clips that I upload of other people's live streams or even my own live stream. So I'm uploading them up on Americana Project. If you guys want to go check out that channel, maybe give it some support, subscribe, like a couple videos or something that intrigue you or whatever, that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
All right. And I'll just quickly chill. So, this has been our pre-election stream. When November 5th finally comes and goes, I'm sure we'll have another one to discuss the results and where we think the country's going. As I mentioned, I do want to have a stream, and I might see if I can find some other guests that to take part. If you have anyone, any other YouTubers or podcast personalities you think I might be able to invite on who would like to have a discussion, what's the real truth about Adolf Hitler, I'd like to do that at some point. And any other topics you'd like to see me address or us talk about, by all means, leave them in the comments after this. Other than that, as always, that is my 2 cents. You can take it for what it's worth. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Bye-bye, everybody.